Meow everybody, how you all doing? Just thought I'd start this video with showing you my books so you can have a look. Stay tuned for a presentation on what you can do now to prevent wildfires wrecking your life and wrecking the life of your community. So wildfires are a factor of life now, it appears, across the globe. On July 7th, 2018, I did a video actually on wildfire prevention and strategies which I gleaned from various sources. And all of that stuff and more I'm going to be putting into our property here once the weather gets a little warmer. The link is in the description. I encourage you to have a look at it and give me a thumbs up and a like and a comment, and even maybe send me some money or your firstborn. This video is from the great courses on when everything fails, how to survive and prepare for any disaster. And this one focuses specifically on fire. And over the 30 minutes they focus on home fires, building fires and wildfires. So I would say if you're in a wildfire area, you probably need more than the 15 minutes the video is going to devote to it, but I will be interjecting with my own rambling thoughts as we continue. So let's get on with it.
To this point in the course, we've discussed some general principles for preparedness, such as why it's important to maintain a posture of preparedness, developing a home disaster plan, critical thinking for crisis situations, and developing skills that can be useful in a disaster situation.
Of course, if you actually have acted upon the lectures rather than just watched them, you will be prepared. If you just watch them, you won't be, will you?
For the next several sessions, we'll explore a variety of different types of disasters, what we know about them, and some specific preparations related to them.
Cool! These will be volcano, earthquake, active shooter, storms, hurricanes, and...
We'll begin in this session with fire, which I've touched on just briefly before in describing how to use a fire extinguisher.
So you do have a fire extinguisher on every level of your home, don't you? This is an ABC one, and as you can see, it is ready to go. You also need every member of the household to know how to operate this, how to set it off in a stress situation at 3 AM, and you need to know how to fight a fire using one of these. Fairly straightforward stuff. Something you should all have and all be able to use.
Large-scale wildfires occur with some regularity, so this sadly could describe multiple incidents. The one we'll be discussing is the 2016 firestorm that took place in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and the city of Gatlinburg, Tennessee. Just before the Thanksgiving holidays on November 23, 2016, a fire began in the area of Chimney Tops Trail in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The location was on a mountaintop with very challenging terrain, including sheer vertical cliff walls, making a wildland firefight even more difficult to undertake. Under the circumstances, park employees made the decision to work to contain the fire within a defined perimeter so that it could burn out. There were airdrops of chemicals to help stop the fire's spread, but there was not an actively engaged fire suppression effort. The situation escalated significantly on November 28th. At the time, there were significant drought conditions with low humidity, meaning that vegetation and other fuels that could feed the fire were very dry and flammable, and wind speeds were escalating rapidly. By the evening, winds had gusted above 80 miles per hour. This caused a dramatic spread in the fire, as the fire itself pushed forward and embers blew in the wind to ignite downwind locations. The growth of the fire was described by the local district attorney as being due to, and this is a quote, an unprecedented, unexpected, and unforeseeable wind event. Without this, the fire would have likely remained confined to the park. However, the fire did spread, and dramatically. Around midnight on November 27th, 75 acres were burning. By 7 a.m. on the morning of November 28th, it was 100 acres. By 3 p.m., 2,000 acres. By 9 p.m., 9,000 acres. And by midnight on November 28, 16,000 acres. And in this time, the fire had passed outside the boundaries of the park and had entered Sevier County and the cities of Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. A look at a map showing the extent of the fire highlights the devastation, as much of Gatlinburg was destroyed. On November 28th, as the fire spread, a massive evacuation effort was quickly assembled. Unlike incidents with some advance warning, this evacuation effort had to be assembled hastily and faced a number of challenges.
So you might want to pause the video and have a couple of minutes thinking. First scenario, You actually live there. What are your specific challenges in this scenario going to be? And then have a think. You're the city police chief or the city mayor. What are your specific challenges in the same situation?
Over 14,000 persons were evacuated from Gatlinburg alone, and shelters were established to house those who had nowhere to go. Donations from local pharmacies helped ensure that persons had access to necessary medications. The after-action report prepared to evaluate the response to the fires had this to say about mandatory evacuations, and this is a quote: "Mandatory evacuation notice was given via sirens. In addition, police, fire, and mass transit personnel were sent door to door in many areas to evacuate citizens and visitors, despite being severely challenged by downed trees, intense fire, downed power lines, and loss of power, landline phones, and internet and cell phone service. Many citizens and visitors also made heroic efforts to warn their neighbors and to provide assistance in fleeing the fires."
I have placed this AAR in the description box, and I do advise you have a look at it. It's a good idea to learn how to formalize an AAR for yourself for various events that happen in your own life, and it's a fairly decent one.
These were indeed heroic efforts, but as the quote stated, access routes became unpredictable as the fire spread, and some persons were not sure which route was best to evacuate. Others didn't want to evacuate, and others still took time to try to pack items before leaving, even when danger was imminent.
These reactions are fairly common, which is why a decent formulated plan, discussed and hopefully practiced in advance of a fire, will allow all of your loved ones, whenever this happens, to actually evacuate swiftly and safely.
The fires began to subside on November 29th, when some local rains began. There were 3 deaths in Gatlinburg and 11 in Sevier County. The fire burned 17,000 acres and 2,500 structures, leading to $2 billion in damages in Gatlinburg alone. This incident occurred in less than a week and illustrates the devastation that a fire can wreak.
Since 2018, this is 2022, globally wildfire threat is a lot worse now than it was even in 2018. This shows why California is burning more often these days, and it is not due to them not using rakes in the forests. Obviously, human interactions with forests and human expansion and human treatment of forests do contribute to wildfire risk. This picture shows the heat dome that burned Linton, BC in Canada. It's not just Canada, it's not just California, it's not just the Midwest, it's not just the Rockies, it's not just Mexico, it's not just Greece, it's not just Germany, it's not just even England. This one shows Turkey's wildfire causes. I could go on, sadly, there is many places experiencing wildfires. Australia, of course. But as we continue to burn fossil fuels, we continue to add carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. This continues to add water vapour and methane to the atmosphere for various scientifically proven reasons, which is scientifically proven to be heating up the planet, both the land and the sea. And it's gradual, so we don't really notice it so much, but we have things called tipping points. But right now, I think most people who are open, not closed to climate change as a possibility, would have to admit it's a reality. Of course, some people won't, and it's up to you. But even if you deny reality, if you deny science, if you deny climate change as human cause, if you deny all those things, really and truthfully, prepare for wildfires and floods and huge snowfalls and huge ice storms and possibly having to evacuate if you live near a coast. It's always a good idea to be prepared. If you disagree with the reasons for being prepared, there are other reasons.
In this section, we will consider structural fires and wildfires and preparedness efforts that can prepare for and mitigate against them.
The focus in 2022, mostly from what I see, is now on wildfires. We've created a false sense that building fires are something that will not affect us, and if it does, we will be able to escape. We have a false sense that we can survive a building fire. However, building fires remain common and remain devastating when they occur. However, the death rates from building fires remain vastly higher at the moment than the death rates from wildfires. As a child of the 60s and 70s, the film The Towering Inferno had a very lasting effect on me, and I never go into any building without knowing where the stairs are and how to get out.
Let's begin by asking, what is fire? This goes beyond knowing flames when we see them, to instead identifying the 4 components that produce fire. They are fuel, heat, oxygen, and a chemical reaction, known collectively as the fire tetrahedron. To consider each in turn, fuel is what's burning. If there's no fuel, there's no fire. A heat source is required to elevate the temperature to the point where something burns. Two ways this can be conceptualized are the flash point and the auto-ignition point of a substance. The flash point is the temperature at which something will burn when a flame is introduced, and the auto-ignition point is the temperature at which something will burn when it simply reaches the necessary level of heat, even without a flame being introduced.
Fahrenheit 451 is a famous example that I came up with from the media of auto-ignition points. They claim in the book, they claim in the film, that paper actually catches fire at 451 Fahrenheit. However, it's worth pointing out that auto-ignition ranges for most things, including paper and the human flesh, is a range. It depends on humidity and various other things that are going on, both externally and internally, to the thing that's about to catch fire.
If the levels of heat are not high enough, a fire won't start. Oxygen is required to sustain fire. If oxygen is removed, the fire goes out. Finally, fire is best viewed as a chemical reaction that occurs when the other three elements are present. There are some chemical agents that are designed specifically to disrupt the chemical reaction, which then extinguishes the fire. We can extend this to our discussion of the chimney tops fire by noting that the dry conditions increased the likelihood that potential fuels would combust. As winds fanned the flames, more dry, combustible fuels were brought into the path of the fire and the embers it produced, and it quickly grew out of control. The rains cooled the fire and helped extinguish much of it, though there were still some areas that remained smoldering for some time afterwards. In some wildfires, a unique type of cloud called a pyrocumulus sometimes develops.
These are cumulus clouds that form very rapidly because of the moisture that's being released from the burning plants and animals affected by the fire. So one of the things in Grid Down is you need to be able to identify this type of a cloud on the horizon and actually scan for it, especially when it's hot, summer and dry, because you may not have any radio that works, you may not have internet. You need to be aware of these things, where the wind's coming from, where the clouds are forming, is there a risk that's going to happen to you? Because without communications, your first indication there's a wildfire about to bear down your property might be when the clouds suddenly go black and you see fire on your property. Not a good scenario. This is also true if you live in a remote area. It wouldn't take much of a blaze in the forest around me to wipe out a lot of the buildings on this property, and I would maybe have zero notice of it at all from normal communications, because if it was a small fire it wouldn't be reported until after property damage had occurred, and it might be my property that's damaged first.
Going back to the fire tetrahedron, as fuel is burning hot, upward drafting air currents actually pull oxygen into the fire, helping to sustain it. And a cloud forms as evaporated moisture condenses on smoke particles. These clouds, which build rapidly, can actually produce rain to help put the fire out. But they can also generate lightning, which can ignite more fires, and air currents that spread burning embers. Of course, a full chemistry lesson on fire is beyond the scope of this discussion, but I think it's important to acknowledge the fire tetrahedron because it underlies so much of fire prevention, that is, trying to keep fires from occurring, and fire suppression, that is, putting out fires that do occur. For suppression, water, whether from a sprinkler, a hose, or a water-based extinguisher, can remove heat and possibly smother the fire from oxygen. Chemical extinguishers can also smother the fire. For prevention, it's important to keep easily combustible materials, that is, fuels with a low flash point or auto-ignition point, away from flames and heat sources. In situations where flames or hot fuels are already present, such as with cooking or even controlled burns of yard waste when they're permitted, one of the best forms of prevention is being vigilant. Make sure that new and unintended fuels aren't being consumed, that the chemical reaction doesn't go too far, and have a fire extinguisher for the kitchen or a hose for outside burns in case a fire needs to be extinguished rapidly.
While most experts say every room of the house except for living rooms and bathrooms, what I say is a living room is actually a great place to have a fire extinguisher. Fires start in kitchens or due to electrical issues mainly, but candles, smoking, cell phone battery issues, iPad battery issues happen. Not frequently, but they happen. One per room other than the bathroom is what I say. You can't have too many, but you really need a lot of smoke alarms that work as well.
Two of the most dangerous and dramatic effects in structural fires in particular are a direct product of the fire tetrahedron. These are the flashover and the backdraft. For flashover, assume that an object in a room begins burning and superheated gases are unable to vent out from the room, so they collect toward the ceiling because heat rises. As they remain and grow, they radiate back into the room. If they continue to do so and the auto-ignition point is reached, the entire room may nearly simultaneously combust, escalating the fire dramatically. If the gases are able to roll into another space, even if it's not the same room as the fire, they can similarly radiate heat that leads to a flashover. This is a product of heat and fuel in an environment with oxygen present. The backdraft occurs in an environment where oxygen is absent. If a fire burns in a closed space, it may in fact burn out available oxygen, so it appears that the fire is out and only smoldering. However, if oxygen is then introduced because a door or window is opened to allow oxygen in, then the fire can explosively reignite. I mention these phenomena to illustrate the complexity of fire. What appears to be a fire burning out may be a fire capable of producing a backdraft. What appears to be a fire confined to one piece of furniture in a room may flash over and unexpectedly and rapidly consume the entire room or other rooms in a structure. As we discuss fire, I want you to bear one thing in mind, and if you don't remember anything else, remember this. If there is a fire, even if it looks like a small fire, call the fire department.
Sound advice, but wildfires can wreck cell phone towers, specifically when you're in rural locations. You do need smoke alarms on every level of the house. You need to have lots of functional fire extinguishers that will work for the types of fire you'll get in a house. You need maybe different types for external buildings, especially if you're storing gasoline or diesel. You also need an escape ladder that works, at least one I would say, and I actually have one, and you can see how far away it is from me here on the second story of my house. Yeah, that's right. I have an escape ladder here so I can get out of that window. I can take the escape ladder and go out that one. Obviously, if this is the source of fire, then I'm in deep trouble. I do have a fire extinguisher on this level. I have a fire extinguisher downstairs. In fact, I have a second fire extinguisher downstairs. One of the things I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be getting a working fire blanket, and I'm going to get maybe one or two more working fire extinguishers. I don't think you can have too many of these. If you're going forward in grid down or in a wildfire situation, I don't think you're ever going to turn around and say, oh, I wish I didn't buy so many fire extinguishers. I don't think that'll happen. Get it out and use it. Make sure it functions. Make sure you and everybody in the household have gone up and down it. It will damage balustrades and wood, so be aware of that, but there's plenty of places you can practice this stuff. This kid needs to be able to do this from this box on her own.
The National Fire Protection Association maintains yearly records of structural fires in the United States. In 2017, there were 499,000 structural fires in the United States. The largest percentage of these, approximately 72%, were in homes, and altogether this caused $7.7 billion in damages. There were 3,400 civilian deaths in fires, approximately 77% of which were in residential fires. There were 14,670 civilian injuries, 72% of which were in residential fires. This suggests that there are very real fire safety concerns in residential properties which we must take into account when thinking about preparedness.
In your car or in your property, you should have a functional and useful first aid kit. A lot of first aid kits will cover burns slightly. What I actually recommend when I looked into all of this stuff is doing this, getting proper burns kits. I think it's really important. I've used this twice now since we arrived here. Kiki keeps burning herself on the cooker because it's an induction stove, she's not used to it, and also the fire because she let the door swing back on once. So it works, and the peg and stuff in these kits work. You might want to consider the investment.
There are some trends that we can identify in terms of the causes of residential fires, and for each, some recommendations for prevention. The leading cause, far and away, is cooking related. In fact, this is the cause of approximately half of all home fires. In order to prevent cooking-related fires, it's important to be sure that your cooking area is free of items that could catch on fire, such as towels placed by the burner, a container that ignites, the recipe you're working from, even some food items and oils. Whether from direct contact with a pot, pan, or burner, or heat radiating from them, a fire can begin. Remember that heat by itself is enough to reach an auto ignition point that can start a fire. Never leave pots and pans unattended. This is particularly a concern for grease fires or oil fires.
If you finally chop a white onion and put about 2 teaspoons of water into a pan and then add the onion and stir it for about 30 seconds to 2 minutes, you don't need to add any oil whatsoever to the cooking process, so you can actually cook without oil. That makes life safer for you. Obviously deep fat fryers and all the rest of it are cardiac death, and so you should be vegan, and that will remove most of the common causes of kitchen fires.
Water reacts explosively with grease and oil due to unique chemical reactions. So what feels like the most instinctual thing to do, dumping a container of water in the pan, actually makes things not just worse, but significantly so.
So have the correct fire suppression gear in the kitchen close at hand. Have the fire blanket and the properly rated fire extinguisher right there so it's visible, and the cook, even if it's not you, if they have an oil fire, they know what to do. Talk about it, make sure everybody in the family understands. Raise the alarm, fight the fire if safe, or raise the alarm and evacuate if unsafe. Make sure even the little kids understand the danger of fire and how rapidly it can spread.
For a grease or oil fire, cover the pan entirely with a lid or even a baking sheet if no lid is available. Turn off the heat and let it sit. Similar to a backdraft, if you take the lid off too soon as oxygen is reintroduced, the fire may reignite. The second most common cause of residential fires is related to heating devices. This is usually attributed to something like a space heater that doesn't have enough clearance between it and flammable materials. 3 feet is generally recommended, as is only using heaters that are rated by a national rating service. This is indicated on their packaging, and those that have a feature that causes them to automatically shut off if tipped over. If you use a fireplace, having an annual inspection and cleaning of the flue can avoid flue fires. The third most common cause of residential fires is electrical equipment. Of course, it's very important that wiring systems meet code standards. Likewise, all appliance cords should be in good condition, and extension cords should be used only minimally, never in a chain sequence of extension cord plugged into extension cord, and not for permanent use, and never for large appliances. Surge protection power strips rated for safety are preferable. Bear in mind that cords can also pose a trip and fall hazard, but at the same time, they shouldn't be stapled to walls or concealed under carpets. Remember the fire tetrahedron. Heat plus fuel in an environment with oxygen can lead to fire. And electrical appliances and wires can pose that risk, especially if used for purposes beyond their ratings, in poor condition, or arranged in a way that leads to overheating. Of course, these are only the top 3 causes of home fires. Smoking, while it's not one of the top 3 causes of home fires, is actually the leading cause of deaths in residential fires. Almost a quarter of home fire deaths are attributed to it. Smoking should be done outside, and ashtrays should not tip or be emptied into trash containers that can burn or which contain flammable items. Candles should be used only with caution, in stands that will not tip, and never left unattended or placed near flammable materials. If a clothing dryer is located in the home, ensuring that the lint trap remains clean and that the vents are regularly cleaned is also important for fire prevention. This has been quite a list of items, and what I'd recommend is reviewing a fire safety checklist. Many are available, including one in the guidebook for this course, and reviewing that checklist in the context of your own home.
So that's the end of the first half of Lecture 6 on fire, but it reminds me of Huples' cat, my cat from years ago, and I'll let you look at my gorgeous little pussy. I love her, and she's always with me in Ash Farm. Really wonderful cat. But we were having candles in the living room, and we were drinking wine and watching TV, and Huples, being Huples, decided to clamber up in an accessible place and actually ignited her tail. So me and Kitty are sitting there watching Huples walking around, oblivious to the flames coming out of her tail. So she was a little shocked when we grabbed her and shoved her into the kitchen and under the tap. She wasn't injured in any way, but it just shows you how fire can just rapidly spread. If her tail had not been observed by us, that tail would have actually ended up catching fire into the living room, and probably within 30 seconds to 2.5 minutes, our living room would have been engulfed in flame. So naked flame needs to be protected and observed at all times. And if you have pets and children, observe when you go to the toilet. Just flick out those candles and then put them back on. Make sure everybody's fire aware. Next week will be the last half of this lecture on fire, and we will look at what this lecturer recommends as the 4 best preps for fire suppression and prevention. And 3 of them are reasonably cheap and 1 of them is not. So until next week, stay safe, get preps at work, don't just watch videos about them, and have a great day.
Until next time, stay safe.
This has been a Dog in a Bonnet Productions.